Okay, well, maybe we'll begin. Okay, great. So start with a few introductions. Hi, I am Charlie, the Chief Tease at Triptease, and I guess I'm involved in this particular production, this webinar, because I am obsessed with data and always have been. My first business when I left university, I started was a research analytics business. So we do like all the research for Starbucks globally on what should they be selling in which coffee shops around the world. I did that for 12 years. So a huge amount of data-driven research to drive business success is kind of my background, and the data is one of the things that I spend a lot of time looking at for our clients at Triptease. And Lucy?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's Lucy. I work with our largest accounts here at Triptease. So A/B testing is a day-to-day part of my role here, working on trying to work out how best to set up our platform with A/B testing. So it's certainly become part of my vocabulary in the last couple of years, and it's something that I've been focusing on a lot. So a really interesting topic to get into for sure.
Great, and we also have Tom Dammett in the background, one of our resident A/B testing experts, statistics experts. So if we have any particularly tough questions, we may be turning to him. Tom's there if needed. And I guess like this is a topic that's very dear to our hearts for a number of reasons. I mean, just this morning we were looking at a case study of a technology provider that purports to help hotels, and the case study talked about the A/B tests they'd just done and the amazing results they'd had. And I can tell you with any small amount of statistical knowledge, you would know that either it's based on incompetence of the data they're presenting, or it's deceitful, right? They are either incompetent or they are lying. And I'm afraid to say that's something that we're seeing just time and again. And that's because statistics is complicated, and most hoteliers are not statistics experts, and perhaps don't know where the flaws lie. And so really, this is just it's something we really care about, and so we thought it was important to talk a bit more about the topic, to explain why A/B testing isn't for everybody, to explain some of the risks and some of the challenges, so that you can see them and identify them. Okay, so just a very quick overview for us. So Triptease, the way we work is we deliver a set of tools, a platform that integrates on top of a hotel website and booking engine. So we are tracking the behavior of every single guest across 17,000 hotel websites and booking engines. We're tracking every single minute thing they do. And we do that because we want to use that behavior to draw out insights and then to deliver better web experiences to convert more guests to direct. So everything we do is all about understanding, interpreting and understanding guest behavior on hotel websites. So I guess that's one of the reasons why data matters to us. This was a chart I just pulled up last week for one of the booking engines we work with. And we were looking at all the hotels across the booking engine, how many conversion events they're getting, how many guests they're getting. And you can very quickly identify when you're sitting across 1,000 hotel websites, which ones are performing well and which ones are performing badly. And like that's at the heart of our business. That's why we really care about data, is that we see our role as helping the hotel industry learn best practice, identify where they're weak, identify if they're underperforming, and do a better job. So that's kind of why we care about this data and why we invest so much time and money and effort into it. And I also thought I'd mention, because it's important to bring out one's demons onto the table early, why is I particularly personally care so much about A/B tests and why it's like a hobby horse for me. Every single time someone joins our business, I get to spend some time with them. It's just one of the processes we have to get to know new people. And every single person who ever joins our business, I walk through this particular example, because this was an example that happened to me. I was closely involved in the early days of Triptease history. And the reason why I thought I'd share it with you is because it's also a mistake. It's like an example of a mistake we made that we were involved in. And I think it's important to get that out early, because it astonishes us how much A/B testing there is that's going on and how little of it we think is done accurately or well. I think in the last 20 large A/B tests that we saw companies run on behalf of hotels, and these are large hotel groups who are paying quite a lot of money to have A/B tests done. Out of 20 that we've seen being run, we probably think 2 were being run accurately and the rest had major flaws. And that's because it's hard. It's a real challenge. But the point I want to make is there's a lot of flaws, a lot of issues. So just to give you this quick example of what happened with us, to highlight just the kind of mistakes that are getting made all the time. So we had a hotel group in a European country who wanted to run a test for one of our tools. And one of our tools is a price check widget that appears after a guest has done a search. So here's the mobile version of the hotel site. And what I should say is that we ran an A/B test, and a month or so after the A/B test, we finished it, and we saw that there was great uplift for desktop. Guests really appreciated this new marketing widget, but on mobile, we saw a really negative impact. In fact, we saw a reduction in conversion rate of about 30%. And I just couldn't believe it. The hotel group had been, we've been trying to sell them for ages. As you imagine, we'd run a test and they'd come out with some bad results. And the thing I couldn't believe was that we'd had such a big negative impact on mobile. And no one had really dug into the details of why or what it could be. There was just this, we ran a test, and the test showed it didn't work, so we're not going to do it. It worked well on desktop, didn't work on mobile, so on average it was like 0, so let's just stop. And obviously I wasn't going to give up that easy, and so I dove into it and had a look at what happened. So here, as you see, is the mobile version of the hotel website. Somebody does a search, they see the prices, and the next step for the guest is to fill in guest details. Here's what we thought we were testing. Someone does the search, they've got the next step that they can press on, but price check appears, and it's a little tab that somebody can open and see the price comparison. And that's what should happen, right? It doesn't get in people's way. It's just something people can check. And all this, we really looked at what was going on in mobile. We realized that the setup of the marketing widget of the price check had been wrong. And in fact, what was happening was this. So a guest would run a search, they'd see the prices, and then the button, which is the next thing you're meant to do, the orange button, kind of disappears. You can barely see it. We were overlapping it instead of pushing it up. So there's been a problem, a mistake in the setup of the test. It was a human error, but the thing that was really painful was people on our side and our business and from the hotel side had gone and had checked the test was set up, and they checked on desktop, and no one took the time to check it on mobile. So there we were a month later, we had the test results, which showed, this widget does not work. It has a negative impact. And of course, what actually happened was we'd set up the test wrong, which is very embarrassing for us and very embarrassing for the person at the hotel who was also meant to be in charge of it. And the reason I say I wanted to talk about this is this is the kind of mistake, forget the statistics. This is the kind of mistake that's happening every single day in the setup of tests. And it's so easy to miss these human errors and to then interpret data wrongly. That's a problem. This data, these tests, they can give you great value, great insight. But more often than not, we believe that hotels are actually misinterpreting data and they're making bad decisions based on poor data. So we thought we'd talk a bit about some of the examples that we've learned from and some of what we think hotels need to do to get it right. And sorry, Lucy, I went off a bit on there, a bit long. Maybe I'll hand over to you on what we're going to talk about next.
No, I think it's really interesting, and it's really important to highlight that it's not only about statistics and all of the kind of nitty-gritty of A/B testing, but also really making sure that everything is actually set up correctly for each different user and each different variant. But yeah, so here is a little bit of an outline of what we'd like to speak about. So the very provocative question of is A/B testing dead, which was also the title of our white paper, which you may have seen. A bit more about the requirements for an A/B test and the common mistakes that we have seen a lot and have happened also to us. So in the spirit of being really honest and just kind of sharing with you exactly the journey that we've been on to learn how to run really accurate A/B tests. And then obviously the OTAs, the ones that really brought A/B testing into the forefront for hotels. Why are they different? Why can they run so many tests? And then also just how to run a test, how we do it, the kind of conclusions that we've come to, and some options if at the end your conclusions are that your hotel is not right anymore to run A/B tests, which would be something that we would hopefully leave you to go with and find a new way of testing features which might be might be much better for your business. And then hopefully lots of questions from the floor to help challenge Charlie and I, so that we have to ask Tom lots of scary technical questions.
Okay, cool, great. So A/B testing dead. So this is a recent headline, I think just from February. Optimizely, which is like one of the leading A/B testing companies, has dropped their free plan. And the reason for this, and as you can see in the headline, is that there's been huge amount of excitement about A/B testing over the last 5 or 10 years. There was a famous experiment by Google of A/B testing 41 different shades of blue, an experiment which actually has been demonstrated to be statistically invalid. But they ran an experiment and everyone was talking about, wow, companies like Google and all this big data, there's a huge opportunity for everybody online to use data to improve their website experience. And that's been the promise and the excitement. And then there are tools like Optimizely that would allow you to run tests on your own on your website. And the reason why Optimizely and others have cut, and Google as well, have cut their kind of free tools, their tools that are designed for small websites, is because A/B testing simply doesn't work for small websites. And all the hype and all the excitement about, oh, this is the way Google does it, this is the way other brands do it, that does not mean this technique transfers well to small websites. And I guess that's one of the key things here. And we're beginning to see a realization of that online. But at the same time, as much as we see that, and we see now the big guys who've been doing A/B testing for a while are holding up their hands and saying this doesn't work for everybody, we're sadly still seeing smaller companies, smaller organizations, and a lot in hotel technology who are saying, oh, you should be A/B testing. It's great. Because it intuitively, it feels right. And intuitively, people want to believe that they can test something and understand it. But I'm afraid that's just not true. Yeah, the majority of hotels, in fact, simply don't have enough traffic to run valid A/B tests. Lucy, would you like to add to that?
I think we were just going to add on the previous slide, and kind of why another reason why collapsing free testing software is actually probably a good thing. You need a lot of knowledge and a lot of understanding to be able to run a rigorous and successful A/B test. Making these tools free means that A/B testing is accessible to those of us who don't fully understand the statistical setup of an A/B test. So it's really important to note that companies who are investing a huge amount of money in this have to invest a huge amount of money for a reason. It's a very expensive and difficult process to get right. So collapsing the free model is actually probably stopping, hopefully, those A/B tests that are incorrectly set up as well.
Yeah, some of them, but not enough. And we're here to stop the rest. Okay, so yeah, the majority of hotels don't have sufficient traffic. To give you an example, again, across thousands of hotels we think that an average hotel, let's say about 100 rooms, basically would need to run an A/B test for 2 years to have enough traffic to be statistically significant. So an average hotel needs a 2-year test. And instead, what we see is, oh, here's a hotel, we tried something for a month and we see it worked. It's just wrong. It's just plain wrong. And if you see those claims on small hotels which say we saw an uplift, blah, blah, it's just a lie. Like, it's either a lie or it's incompetence, but it's one or the other, because you just simply don't have enough traffic. And so most hotels, and this is where I perhaps expect to see some of the attendance drop off. If you're a small independent hotel and you're thinking about A/B testing and you're on this webinar to learn why A/B testing works for you, I'm afraid the answer is it doesn't. And you need to understand that because there's a lot of people who are trying to push an alternate story, and it's just bad statistics. Okay, so 2 years, and of course, if you think about it as a hotel, if you did run an A/B test on one thing on your website for 2 years, it wouldn't be valid anyway. So fine, you'd have enough volume of people to see the test results. But so many things happen over a period of 2 years. You're going through different cycles of annual booking periods. You're going through shifts of people moving from desktop to mobile booking. You're going through periods where you may have been spending money on retargeting, or periods where you're spending money on advertising and then not spending. So there's so many other changes that you just can't run a test over that period of time. So short story is, the vast majority, if you're an independent property, you shouldn't be worried about A/B testing. I'm afraid it's just not something that's going to be working or be right for you. And if you try to use that data, you're probably going to be making bad decisions with it. So let's talk about a few of the common mistakes, Lucy.
Yeah. So these three mistakes are things that have happened to us. So things that we've noticed in our A/B testing that have made us think and consider kind of how we need to control for these issues in all of our tests. So number one is, judging too soon. For this, on the second day of this AA test, so in this instance, both the variants will be the same. So you're practically not testing anything just to make sure that your A/B test is set up correctly. The downswing was somewhere around -15% on the second day. At this point, you might start to panic that your A/B test is set up, your AA test, sorry, I should say, is set up incorrectly, and there is some difference between the two, or your test software is incorrect, or a number of different reasons mean that you need to cut this off immediately, so as not to impact your website. What in reality we see towards the end is a convergence to zero, which is what we would expect. So it's important to set yourself a threshold of conversions, especially for an AA test and also probably for an A/B test as well, of how many conversions you need before making a decision on the kind of impact that the test has had. So this can sometimes help you to realize how long you need to run before you start panicking or judging the result. So in this instance, we always set a minimum threshold of 1,000 conversions for an AA test before we sign off and agree that we're happy that the test is set up correctly before we move forward. So that's a way to make sure that you don't have this problem.
And there are kind of subtly two problems in here. So one is you need a certain volume before you can call the test. It's like, think about flipping a coin. You might think, oh, you might get 3 heads in a row, but that doesn't mean the coin is biased or is always going to turn up heads, right? It just means you happen to get 3 heads in a row. Thousands of times to know for sure whether it is biased or not, and this is part of it. The other subtle bias, or the other subtle mistake that gets made when judging too soon, is that there's a huge desire, and I know I suffer from this too, right? I think everybody does. If you set up a test and you're like, great, we're going to run a test for a month, it's like practically impossible for humans not to want to like sneak a little look under the covers and see how it's going, right? You want to see, oh, okay, I know the test has to run for a month, but let's look at it 3 days in. Let's look at it 4 days in. I wonder how that test is going. It's natural to want to do that. And the danger of doing that, even if you know, okay, I'm not going to really read much into the results, I'm going to wait and see. The danger of doing that is it becomes a habit. And what happens then is you start to call tests early. And what you're doing is you're just creating the opportunity for bias to sneak in. So every time you look early at a test, your brain is finding reasons why, oh, it's showing me this, it's showing me that, and you're looking to, you want to jump to conclusions. It's incredibly easy to jump to conclusions, and they're more often wrong than right. So sneaking an early look at tests is just dangerous because it just drives a bunch of thinking in your mind that is likely to drive to the wrong decision. Okay, so that's the first one. Thank you very much. Next.
Yeah, so this one's really interesting. This is also based on a real case. So the key here is kind of going back to what we were saying earlier. You need to make sure that your A/B test is representative of the traffic that you would normally see, to make sure that you're actually testing against your normal customers, so in a normal booking cycle. So the example here we have is the share of traffic on an offers page. You'll see a huge spike on the right-hand side. This was a very famous UK deals site promoting a specific hotel group, driving a huge amount of increase in sessions, but a much lower conversion rate. So there were lots of people going to check out the offer, but they weren't making a booking. So this drove down the conversion rate, but increased the number of visitors. We were able to isolate that was only on a specific offers page and not on the normal booking engine. So in this test, we actually excluded those specific days when we saw that traffic. So the point here being, you need to check. You can't just leave an A/B test and let it run. You need to be making a huge myriad of different checks to make sure that your A/B test is running correctly throughout. So this might be one of them. Another example is making sure the traffic is the same on both sides, making sure that for us, for example, on price check, we have show a great importance to parity. So we have to control for both sides having the same amount of times that there is a cheaper price on an OTA. So for you, there will be different things in each test, but you need to make sure that you have all of your checks written down and easily checkable within your A/B testing tool throughout the entire test to make sure that you're accounting for any issues throughout.
Yeah. And there are many, because like hotels, there'll be someone else who's running adverts or doing things that drives different behavior from different audience groups. And it's very easy to come a cropper on that one because the test is running over time. Okay, thank you. Next one. Okay, well, actually, this is another one that happened to us, which was a story worth learning from. So we were working with a large hotel group. They had enough data. We were tracking what was going on a regular basis. And I think their goal was they were targeting a 2% uplift. So what we were doing, they wanted to see, can it drive a 2% uplift? That would be a great impact for this particular hotel group, because it had a very good website. So we started running the test. And then quite quickly, I think it was maybe scheduled to be run for a month, 15 days in, they wanted to look at the results. The results show that we're at a 2% uplift, and in fact, we're improving. And what we found was they were like, okay, well, we had a quick peek at the test results, but let's keep letting it run. And so we let it carry on running. And in fact, by the end of the month-long test, the results were 12%. So here we were looking for a 2% uplift, and we got a 12% uplift. You can imagine the hotelier who commissioned the work and who thought this was going to work was delighted. We internally were delighted. We wanted 2%. We got 12. It's just great. Now, for some reason, we let the test was just carried on running, and we didn't stop the test after the month. I think we were deciding what to test next with them. And it was just running in the background. And obviously, this being such a success and proving the hypothesis that we wanted to prove, the amount of detailed research into have we checked everything was right and working well was probably a little bit lower than if it hadn't been working the way we'd expected. We might have interrogated the data harder, but because we let the test run on, we noticed that after a month, every day, the results on the test were getting better and better and better. And every day, this uplift, which we'd expected 2%, it had got to 12, just kept on growing. And the difference in the variance between, the control and the variant was just getting better and better. And it got to the point where it got to a 28% uplift when we'd expected 2. Now, again, this sounds fabulous. Actually, it was so big that we realized, wait, there's something wrong here. The fact that every day this gets better, and the fact that it's so much better than we had expected, means there's something wrong. And so we stopped and we did a much deeper dive into how the test has been set up. And what we found out was, and again, it's so often these things are human error, there was a miscommunication between us and a third party who were running the test. And the test was meant to be on desktop, but actually some of the people from mobile were also being included in the testing group. And so every day, more mobile people were added into the control group, and when they should have been added into a not being tested group. And because mobile conversion rates are lower, it meant the control group got worse and worse and worse every day. So basically, the way traffic was being directed on the website when someone arrived on the site was having a negative impact on the control group. And it was just a human error, right? It's just because two parties had mislabeled something. Obviously, it wasn't our error, but that's by the by. The point is, this is what happens. It's human error that so often drives the wrong result. And so there, everyone's celebrating about the test, but actually, it was a void test, and we had to redo it. Now, I'm glad to say that when we redid it, everything's fine. But again, the learning's there, and it wasn't. And I think we particularly pulled this one out because, again, it's when you see something that reflects what you were hoping for, it's incredibly tempting to go, great, proved it, and let's move on, right? Your hunch was right. And yet most of the time with hunches in testing, and there's a great video on YouTube, the head of A/B testing at booking.com talking about it. His view is, I just never know. I have no idea what the hunches are. We just test everything because we find that people who think they know what's going to happen often don't. So yeah, you've got to basically test things that go well investigate things that go well as much as the things that go badly. And just more broadly, though, this is a really good point about test setup. another thing we find is that, for example, if you've got people don't come to hotel websites once and book. Not most people. Most people come to a website and are thinking about their booking over a period of days, sometimes weeks, and they might make their booking on the second visit or the third visit. Okay, so given that, it's really important when you're running a test to make sure that the individual user is receiving the same experience each time they return. Okay, if you're doing, for example, split the traffic A/B, every time someone comes to the website, you split them into the A or B test. That is what you're doing is you're voiding the test. You need to split the person the first time they arrive, and then you need to give them a consistent experience each subsequent time that they're back on the site. Okay, it's like something that we see far too often. People focus on sessions and wanting to split by session, when in fact you need to split the users. And sorry, as an aside, this is one of the worst things Google's ever done for the hotel industry. I mean, Google's great for the hotel industry in many ways, but what a real shame is that Google Analytics, which is the kind of basis for a lot of people's thinking about conversion rates, Google Analytics is set up on sessions. Everything's about conversion rate on sessions. The hotel industry is not like retail. People do not generally come and book on the first visit, on the first session. You need to look at users and think about your user conversion rate. Okay, so anyway, again, we could go on for hours about this in the detail. The point is, it's very, very, very common that people who think they have a test that is running, that is set up well, has issues in it, and that's why we find very few that are getting set up properly at the moment.
And also on this, also on this, there's not only just checking kind of how it's set up on both sides, but actually making sure you get yourself into both groups and see what the user experience is on both sides. I've seen before a test where they thought that the users were splitting correctly and everything looked to be set up from the data. They had a number of different ways of checking and it all looked fine. When we actually went and tested both sides of the test, it was mislabeling the control and mislabeling the variant. So the users that were supposed to see the variant sometimes saw the control and vice versa. So it was just crossing the users every time. So there was absolutely no validity in any of the data. And I guess this was another reason why you need to kind of test and just look at it from your perspective, like be the user and put yourself in that position and really just make sure that everything looks okay before you move on.
And I just realized I should probably say at this stage, right? We, Triptease, we don't consider ourselves an A/B testing company. That's not the business we're in. The reason why we've invested quite literally millions of dollars on this in the last year is because we've been astonished that the best class A/B testing companies that are out there are just making mistakes so much. And so we see our role as being a guardian to make sure that the data that's being used and understood and interpreted by people is for real. And that's all we really care about. Okay, so that was some mistakes. So why is it then the OTAs shout so much about A/B testing and that it's of great value to them?
Yeah, so this is another one around kind of data scale and significance and all those fun words that nobody really knows the real true meaning of. But basically, why OTAs can test and hotels can't is purely because of the number of bookings and the number of properties and conversions and just the data scale that they have at their fingertips to test against. They kind of measure up to Google really in terms of their size. And so what they have is the ability to test very small changes and find detectable impact. Equally, they have a lot of people working for them. They have people that have a lot of knowledge of how to set tests up. They know what they're looking for when a test is set up incorrectly. They'll have a number of different ways of testing this, and it will be a very smooth process that they've invested a huge amount of money in. There's kind of, that's the reason why they're able to test, and that's why they will obviously continue to test. But kind of don't panic at this stage. OTAs are able to A/B test a lot more simply just because of their data scale. But there's a lot that they don't own that you do. So it doesn't rule out kind of everything for hotels. Hopefully we're going to provide you with a solution in a moment.
Yeah, and the data scale, the size of people going into tests is really important because I mean, putting aside the fact that we see a huge amount of human error and other errors, size is size of audience, the sort of N in the test, number of people, is essential, because the conversion event is relatively rare, right? If 100 people come to a hotel website and only 3 or 4% are converting, then it's a very small number you're testing for. And so a fluctuation in that number can have a disproportionate perception if the test isn't set up right. And the kind of the two things that really we're testing for, right? We want to make sure that by having a large number of participants, is we want to make sure we have no false negative tests and no false positive tests. So what does that mean? Like, real world example, you want to make sure if you're in court that you don't send an innocent man to jail or an innocent person to jail. But equally, you want to make sure that guilty people don't walk free. So that decision on, is this person guilty or innocent, actually it can go wrong in two different ways. And having a large number of people, very large volume, is the best way to guard against making those errors, which just come up so much. If you're an independent hotel, you are sending a lot of innocent people to prison with your A/B testing, if you're trying to do it, basically. And the OTAs with their data scale can guard against that. Okay, so, well, what can hotels do, and what do we advise for hotels who want to be running A/B tests?
So I think the key for me here is really that hotels own the guest. You sometimes don't realize how powerful that can truly be. You know who the kind of people are that are booking on your website. You can totally make sure that your website is optimized for that kind of person. So it's kind of starting on the right-hand side. You have, your guests are the ones who are walking into your hotels, so why not ask them what they think? Or something that we've done in the past is go and just ask people in a coffee shop, what do you think of this? It will help you to get really interesting feedback on, okay, maybe a smaller scale, but it might surface some really interesting insights of just actual kind of day-to-day users. Something that we mentioned before, benchmarking, it's something we're really trying to surface at Triptease a lot more. So we have obviously access to a lot more data than the everyday hotel, and surfacing how you're doing compared to your peer set can be really useful to really highlighting an area. So for example, we often show if someone's booking engine is suffering and not converting as well, whereas their full funnel is converting really great. And actually most people who make a search will kind of go on to book. So you can really highlight which bits of your website need help.
And sorry, I'm gonna just on the making use of user group testing. So I mentioned before I had a research and an analytics firm. So we did both quantitative testing, so where you'd want a big number of people to be measuring something, and qualitative testing. And you can get a lot of value from qualitative. In fact, as a rule of thumb, we often, if we're developing something new in a product, we will go to a coffee shop and we will show someone on an iPad, oh, look, here it is, can you walk through this process for me? And as a rule of thumb, if you get 4, 5, 6 people to walk through a process and you watch them and they talk to you as they do it, you're generally going to find out most of the issues and problems. You don't need to speak to 100 people. There are ways of getting really good input just from a relatively small number of people. So go to Starbucks, buy someone a coffee, and say, in return, can you please book a room on my hotel website? I want to watch as you do it, and let me know what you're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think Google Analytics is both a hotel's worst enemy and could potentially be your best friend, but it sits in the same area as A/B testing in terms of setup. You need someone who knows what they're doing with relation to Google Analytics. If you're going to change something and track it, you need to make sure that it's set up to track correctly within your Google Analytics and that you haven't got some kind of problem that's causing the data not to come through correctly. It's also one of these places that's very much full of noise. Your booking cycles, your guests, your seasonality, all of these things change a huge amount. And equally, you're doing a lot off your website to try and push more traffic to your website. So you really need to control for all of those things when you're looking at Google Analytics. So as long as, again, you make sure it's set up correctly and you know the right way to use it, it's great. If it's set up wrong, it's very much sits in the realm of kind of killing your website and causing you to make decisions on merely chance and not real data, which is, of course, not what anyone wants. So then finally, prioritizing smooth customer journey. Now, there is nothing wrong with small cosmetic changes. That's not what we're saying at all. They have every value. We've seen kind of copy changes make a huge impact. But if your website is as a whole really difficult for a user to use, really prioritizing the customer journey as a whole and making sure that's really smooth is a lot more important than worrying about one specific area at a time. So consider what it's like from a guest perspective and really kind of look at the whole funnel of your website and see if that's as smooth as it can be. Is there six different steps before I can actually get a booking confirmation on your website? Is there a couple of areas of the form that you could remove and get from the guests once they've actually made a booking? Just make it really easy. Think about what it was like before perhaps you worked in a hotel. I know for me, that's how I try and go back to before I worked in the industry and think about how the hotel website looks to someone who doesn't necessarily work within a hotel and knows how it all works and knows all the industry jargon. Another one of my favorites on this is kind of book direct. Who knows outside the industry what direct booking means? Think about what that means to the user. They want to know that they're booking and getting the best thing on your website. They don't know necessarily what direct means. So just really think about try and think about how it is for someone who, like your everyday guest, basically, who's coming to your hotel, and that might help you to figure out what the best thing to do on your website is.
And Lucy, if you can, if a hotel group can run an A/B test, sorry, I might go back a slot. Can you just talk about the requirements we have for A/B tests and why and how this works?
Yeah, so we've kind of over the time that we've worked on our A/B testing process, worked out how many conversions we need for a test on. Oh, the lights have just gone out. How many conversions we need for a test like ours. So Price Check is quite a big change to your booking engine. It's quite it can make quite a lot of impact. So we only need 6,000 conversions. So for a smaller change, you would need more conversions than that. But if you're making a change that will change the environment that the guest is in that page, then about 6,000 conversions should be right. Run an AA test. Make sure that you're not seeing a difference between the two sides before you've even started the A/B test. It's really good practice just to even do that for 1 week. 6 to 8 weeks. So you should.
And sorry, that's one I was just stopping you on. If you currently are using an A/B testing company or running A/B tests and you haven't run an AA test on any of the past tests, I mean, you should really consider whether you've got the right partner. If you're not running AA tests as a matter of course on a regular basis, but you're running ABs, you just don't know if you've got the setup right. You just have to do it, because it's amazing how often you run an AA and you go, oh, it turns out we're dividing the audience incorrectly, or we're making a mistake. And the danger is you'll sort of jump into the A/B test and believe the result you've got just because something says 16.4%. People seem to believe it, and yet it could be a completely flawed test. So yeah, always run AAs.
Mm-hmm. And making sure that you can get to the conclusion of a test in a relatively normalized time frame. So we go 6 to 8 weeks is the longest A/B test that we run, and within that time you should be able to control for booking cycles and not have too much volatility in your conversion rate. So try to not run, this is going back to the don't run an A/B test for 2 years argument. Try to make sure that you can make a conclusion on the test and you can have enough conversions through it in a kind of effective duration.
And so just to be clear on that, when you say booking cycles, so that is because if an average booking cycle for your guests is 28 days, which a bunch of reports have said is average for many hotels. If the average booking cycle is 28 days and you're testing something on your website and you only run the test for 28 days, then it's only people who happen to arrive on the first day of your test and had completed their booking cycle who've had the whole new experience, right? Whereas actually you've got a whole bunch of people who'll be who looked at your website before and they're coming back to book after 2 weeks, and they may not have been involved in the test before, but they are now, and vice versa. So that's why the length of booking cycle is quite important. If you run a test for a week, but your booking cycle is 3 weeks, you're actually you're just testing rubbish.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And then the final point is something that we've probably hammered home quite hard is you need to know every data point, like just as much transparency as you can get is really super important as well. So any test software that doesn't give you access, and these are the free ones mostly, doesn't give you access to every data point, and you have to pay for that. If you are within the realms of being able to run A/B tests, I really just would pay for your software, or even get an agency to do it for you who knows what they're doing, and then you can make sure that you're getting it right every time.
Great, thank you. Myth busting and Q&A. So yeah, now on to questions if there are any. And while we wait for those to come up, there was one other word I saw on the last slide that we didn't talk about, which was the importance of having a hypothesis. Again, such is the variability in real results in tests, the potential, the likelihood, or the opportunity to see something that isn't really there, or to miss something that is really there. That it's really important when you approach testing to have a clear hypothesis, to take the time to write down, this is what we're testing and this is why we believe it's going to be true. That's a far, far safer approach than, well, we're going to test a bunch of things and we're going to see which one works. I mentioned before the Google 41 Shades of Blue test, where they tested 41 different colors on a button to see which blue was going to drive the best results. And they were just like, let's throw all the blue tests out there. We don't know which one it's going to be. Now, the problem with that kind of approach, the reason why it's flawed is because, if you test 41 different shades of blue, one of them randomly is going to come out top, even if it wasn't actually a preferred bet. And so because there's no hypothesis, because there isn't, well, we believe this blue is going to be right because, we think these things, you're much more likely to have a flawed test. So important to get that hypothesis really clear and make that the thing that you go out and test. Mm-hmm. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. So this is quite an interesting one. If I've done an A/B test with another provider and it was positive, should I now consider it meaningless?
Now, obviously, it depends. I would say if you've done an A/B test with another provider where you had fewer than, so it slightly depends on what exactly you were testing. But let's say you were looking for a 95% confidence that a test was right, and it was a change to your website which was going to drive a 5% incremental change. So if you were looking for that, then if you didn't have 12,000 conversion events, so 6,000 on each side, if you didn't run an AA test, then we personally just would reject it internally. We'd be like, it's more likely that this test was flawed than it is that it was accurate. So yeah, I'm afraid more often than not, we find that hotels, even very large hotels, spending millions on their agencies and support to run A/B tests, are having these same errors all the time. So I'm afraid generally we treat everything with skepticism at first when we see data, until we've proven specifically and done the research.
And you're really just leaving it to chance if it's not backed up with kind of normal statistics. And all of this really is just mathematical kind of calculations. So it's not really there's not really an opinion one way or the other. The idea is that it kind of excludes that. So really, if it doesn't measure up to the normal mathematical calculations of an A/B test for any kind of e-commerce company, then really it's not a valid result. So if you can't get those answers from the provider of who's done the A/B test for you, and they're not willing to share kind of all of that information, that's a bit of a red flag straight away. They should be sharing all data points with you to really prove to you that they ran a healthy and rigorous and accurate test as well. So could you explain again exactly what an AA test is? So
yeah, sorry, go on.
This is really so this is literally where you set up the test as if you were to set it live, and then whatever change that you're testing for, you don't launch yet, but you just launch the test, and you split traffic still for both sides. So your website's the same for both sides of the test, but you're splitting your traffic as if there was going to be a change on one side, but you haven't yet made whatever change that's going to be. So basically, you're making sure that you're comparing two things that should be the same, and therefore there shouldn't be any difference between the two, to make sure that things like your traffic is splitting correctly, you haven't seen an uplift in conversion rate, that you see the kind of number of traffic that you were looking for, that kind of thing. Does that make sense, Charlie? Have I got
I think so. Yes. So it's about checking the tooling. It's about checking your tooling before you go into an A/B test. And the way you check the tooling is you test something where you know there is no difference between A and A, right? It's called AA because it's identical. So you have two things you're testing and they are identical. So if you run a test and it shows that one is better than the other, you know there's something wrong with the way you're interpreting the test or the data. And the reason for doing it is if you know they're identical, you can check and identify where the test might be falling down before you run a real live test. So hopefully that answers it. Yeah. AA is identical.
So the next one is, what are the key points you would consider to assess whether potential A/B partners know what they're doing? It's interesting.
I think ask them about their process. Ask them about like are they doing the kinds of things that we would recommend? Because honestly, I wouldn't work with someone who didn't. And make sure that, as Lucy said just now, they're going to give you all the data so you can see it. Yeah, and then as with any provider, I'm personally a big fan of go and find 2 or 3 other hoteliers who've worked with them, who've had a good experience, and ask them for the detail. And go and find 2 or 3 hoteliers who've worked with them and no longer are customers, and ask them for detail. Like, nothing beats really good reference checking. It's far, far too easy to just jump in bed with somebody and not really take the time to just go and sense check it. So yeah, that's what I'd do. I mean, if you want to have like some really cunning questions to be able to ask them to put them on the spot, I'm sure we could provide those. But I think it's more about just really understanding their process.
And I think also really important to kind of highlight here that when we were kind of setting up our current A/B testing process, we actually brought a consultancy in to speak to us about A/B testing and the kind of things that we should be measuring for, and some thresholds that we should look for error and that kind of thing. So we've kind of brought the knowledge into the company to try and further understand this. So the reason why we're trying to share this knowledge with you is that we've hopefully done quite a lot of research into making sure that the way that you A/B test is really accurate. So I guess, like, if you're really interested in it, try and research it a little bit more. But yeah, just try and bring up all of those key points that we've already shared with you. Like, ask them if you're right for an A/B test, and if they look at your traffic and you're below the numbers that we've suggested, and they say yes, then that should be some alarm bells going off in your head straight away, and that kind of thing.
Big red.
So the next one is interesting. Do Booking.com run A/B tests on my individual hotel listing? If so, should I be notified of when they're doing that?
I don't think they can. Again, it's all about volume. So if Booking.com was on your individual hotel listing only taking 100 bookings a month or even 100 bookings a day, they just simply wouldn't have volume on your hotel listing to be running an A/B test. So I think it's highly unlikely that they would be doing that. Should you be told? No, I don't think so. I mean, people view OTAs in different ways, but if you are paying an OTA because you want them to drive you bookings, and you're happy and you're comfortable that they're driving you incremental bookings and that you want to be listed by them, then surely you want them to do the best job they can for people who've arrived on their website to get them to book with you. So if that means Booking are going to be running tests every day to try and optimize their website, booking your partner and they're bringing you bookings, that's a good thing for you. So I don't think you should be worried about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. If I see a 10% uplift in 2 weeks after I change something, it's irrelevant. Do I completely ignore the change I've made? So I think for me, this is all about statistical significance, right? So a 10% uplift is great, and a lot of the time that is quite a big difference between the two variants. But if it's only based on 100 conversions either side, that difference doesn't now suddenly sound so great. You have to, and there are lots of free calculators online that you can use to actually input your numbers that you've seen and work out if you've got a statistically significant test. I think there's even one called abtestingcalculator.net that you can use. I mean, if you have an A/B testing provider, they should really show this within the tool as well. But you can input your numbers and work out if you've got on whatever uplift it is, a statistically significant test, so that this is kind of that your hypothesis that you've proven is positive is in fact not now nullified. So that is to say, you've seen a positive effect, and your hypothesis is now you have proved it to be correct. So this is making sure that you haven't had a false positive.
So wait, sorry. The short answer is, because the question is, I had a 10% uplift in 2 weeks. Should I ignore it? It depends entirely upon the number of people who went through that test. Right. That's the simplest way to answer it. Is if in 2 weeks you had 50,000 people go through that test and convert, then that may be great, and 10% in 2 weeks is worth moving on. Now there are some issues about booking windows and all that sort of stuff. And the 2 weeks, is that too short? But no, you might decide that as an organization, you've got such a volume that you're happy to run tests, to make decisions in 2 weeks and move on to the next one, because you've got volume. It's just all about volume. Have you got enough people who converted to know it wasn't fluke? Because the fluke comes up a lot.
Yeah, and I think like a really interesting way I heard this being put, I read earlier, was like medical testing. You have to consider how many people they have to test the vaccine on before they allow it to go out into the wild. There are always going to be false positives with kind of testing things. And if you think about it in lots of different statistical ways, we use statistics to make so many decisions everywhere. So don't just think about it in terms of your website. Think about it outside that. Think practically whether the change that you're making would make that kind of impact on conversion rate, and really consider, just kind of, I guess, take a step back and really think practically whether you would expect that kind of change to make a 10% impact. If you're changing kind of one really small thing that not everyone on your website has seen, and it's made a 10% uplift in conversion, likelihood is that's probably not quite right. But if you've made a huge change to your whole journey, then one would expect those kind of changes to your conversion rate straight away.
And is that it on questions?
That's it on questions, I think.
Great. Okay, cool.
Anyone?
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, Lucy, for all your input. If you have any further questions, if you want us to, if you're considering hiring an A/B testing company and you want us to talk to them, we're very happy to on your behalf, if that helps. But if you have any further questions about A/B testing or data in general, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. And then the last thing, a quick advert for the Direct Booking Summit, where hundreds of hotels come together to share their best practices about driving direct bookings. If you're interested in direct bookings, I highly recommend you come to either Amsterdam in June for the Direct Booking Summit, or just after the summer in Dallas. We will be running a US version. So Direct Booking Summit, you can Google it, and you will find signups if that's something you're trying to chase as a hotelier. Anyway, thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you.